Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 8, UN System, Peacekeeping, Peacemaking and Adjudication. Let us have introduction about the unit. The UN's agenda for peace can broadly separated into four groups: preventative diplomacy, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. Preventative diplomacy tries to put an end to the conflict by getting the concerned parties to resolve the conflict before it become violent. Peacemaking tries to resolve the conflict diplomatically, but after the bout becomes violent, it tries to get involved parties to cease fire. Peacekeeping role of the UN comes into play at this stage to make sure that the ceasefire is honored. Peace building in the last stage that promotes peace and order by raising social structures, legal systems, and sometimes even setting up a new government. The principal focus of this unit is on methods of peaceful settlement of disputes, which are not purely diplomatic, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and adjudication. While peacemaking may involve the traditional or diplomatic modes of setting disputes described in the preceding unit, peacekeeping goes beyond these, though it falls short of military or enforcement provisions in Chapter 7. It is non aggressive use of military force to help nations in conflict reach a settlement. Other non diplomatic methods of resolving disputes are the adjudicative methods, where a third party is invested with power to decide the dispute. The method by which the decision is reached is not, as in diplomacy, by persuasion but by determining the question of fact on which the parties are in disagreement and reaching a decision on the dispute by applying the applicable law to the facts. The unit also bestows attention on the adjudicative functions of the International Court of Justice and other judicial tribunals. Now, the next point is peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building. The first one is peacekeeping characteristics. Peacekeeping as an operation does not find mention in the UN Charter. It has grown out of the practice of the UN. It has been described fairly accurately in the Blue Helmets, a review of United Nations peacekeeping. Thus, as the United Nations practice has been evolved over years, a peacekeeping operation has come to be defined as an operation involving military personnel but without enforcement powers, undertaken by the United Nations to help maintain or restore international peace and security in the areas of conflict. These operations are voluntary and are based on consent and cooperation. While they involve the use of military personnel, they achieve their objective not by force of arms, thus contrasting them with the enforcement action of the United Nations under Article 42. By and large, peacekeeping forces are employed to act as a buffer between two parties which had been at armed conflict but which have accepted a ceasefire. In some situations, it may be considered that an observation mission would satisfy the purpose of observing whether the ceasefire is being kept. In 1947, for example, the Security Council appointed UN observer team in Indonesia in connection with the conflict between the Dutch colonists who attempted to maintain the old colonial order as against Indonesian nationalists. No member of the Security Council was prepared to support the Dutch colonial order. The observer team was to observe and report to the Security Council the observance of the various ceasefire lines and sporadic fightings. The Security Council considered the reports from the observers and acted towards Indonesian independence. In 1949, the Security Council appointed the UN Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan to observe whether the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in Kashmir was being kept, and that group exists even now. The parties agreed to cease fire, and what was needed was observance of the compliance by the parties. Observation groups were employed in some other cases also. An observer group may not consist of more than 100 members. A peacekeeping force, on the other hand, consists of several thousands of lightly armed soldiers. An observer group simply observes and reports, but a peacekeeping force should first of all secure a ceasefire and possibly ensure the withdrawal of the forces to the positions occupied before the adoption of the ceasefire. The model of the peacekeeping force may be found in the UN Emergency Force established in 1956-57. Britain, France, Israel were involved in armed conflict with Egypt following the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Egypt. The UN General Assembly met in emergency special session acting under the Uniting for Peace resolution called for a ceasefire and directed the Secretary General to deploy a peacekeeping force to secure the observance of the ceasefire. Peacekeeping operations are based upon the following principles. First, the parties to the conflict must agree to cease fire and withdraw troops to agreed positions and to the presence of the peacekeeping forces on their soil. The UNEF-1 was inducted with the express consent of Egypt when in 1967 President Nasser of Egypt withdrew the consent for stationing the peacekeeping force. Secretary General Youth Hunt ordered the withdrawal of the force. The peacekeeping forces are contributed by willing members of the UN and in accordance with the agreement reached by the Secretary General and the contributing member. Generally, a conflicting party does not agree to emplacement of forces on its soil if the state to which the forces belong has a vested interest in the outcome of the conflict. Second, the peacekeeping force must act with impartiality and neutrality between the rival parties. If they do not, the state within the forces are situated might create difficulties to the functioning of the forces. In 1974, the Security Council established the UN Observer Force UNDOF pursuant to the agreement on disengagement between Syria and Israel following the Israeli occupation of Golan Heights. This Israel occupation has been an obstacle to permanent peace between Syria and Israel, but the UNDOF has been successfully in maintaining calm on the Syria Israel front ever since it was established. And one of the contributing factors to the success has been the UNDOF's neutrality and impartiality. Third, the peacekeeping forces are authorized to use force only in self defense. Peacekeeping forces are supplied with rifles and transport vehicles. They are not capable of carrying out an enforcement action. If peacekeeping forces are unlike forces that take enforcement action, they are also unlike observer missions, which are not likely to be engaged in self defense. Peacekeeping forces may have to patrol the buffer zone or other demilitarized zones. Very lightly armed observer groups are incapable of performing peacekeeping. The next one is peacemaking. Peacemaking is defined in an agenda for peace, preventative diplomacy, peacemaking, and peacekeeping report of the Secretary General as action to bring hostile parties to agreement, essentially through such peaceful means as those foreseen in Chapter 6 of the Charter. But in actual practice, it has gone beyond this. It might include coercive and forceful action, unlike the consensual operation of peacemaking. Next point is peace building characteristics. In the agenda for peace, the Secretary General Boutros Ghali proposed peace building as a way of preventative resumption of civil conflicts by the parties, which for the time being have stopped fighting as a result of peacemaking efforts. There is every chance of such resumption, resulting in the whole fabric of the civil society collapsing as a result of an intensified civil war. The objectives of peace building stated by him include disarming the previously warring parties and restoring order, the custody and possible destruction of weapons, repatriating the refugees, advisory and training support for security personnel, monitoring elections, advancing efforts to protect human rights, reforming and strengthening governmental institutions, and promoting formal and informal processes of political participation. The objectives of peace building are wide ranging, some of short term and some of long term. Just as peacemaking may present problems of taking coercive action, peace building is likely to entail using some coercive measures. Therefore, peacemaking may include some peace building as well. In the cases studied below, it will be observed that peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building have occurred in different combinations and sequence. Here we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.